listeners, welcome in. Sean over at Travel Through Stories has taken a tag from Instagram and turned it into a video format. And he tagged me, sort of. And Paperbird tagged me on Instagram. So I'm going to talk about 9 books that I wish that I could read for the first time again. And to also honor Sean's selection of the number 11, I'm going to talk about 2 books that I really love that I don't want to read for the first time again. First up is Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson. It's not often you could use the word perfect novel, but I feel like this one actually gets there. We have this super erudite narrator who is losing her mind. She thinks she is the only person in the world, and we don't get any evidence to the contrary, but it seems unlikely. But she reveals through all of these anecdotes and musings on art and philosophy in particular, we get this painting of this very interesting, eccentric woman. And I would really like to be able to read this again for the first time, because there is something in uncovering the labyrinthine structure of this narrator's mind. It is so enthralling to sort of map out and hypothesize about how this narrator is unreliable. And in my opinion, the best unreliable narrator of any book I've ever read. I've reread this book a couple of times, and I will reread it again. But there is something to that first puzzle, at first trying to make sense out of everything that's wonderful about this book. That's definitely something I would want to relive. And now with Dalkey Archive reprinting this book once again in April of next year, I hope that this book sees some love and some hype on Instagram and BookTube and everywhere else, and that a lot of people read it. Second book is Auto da Fe by Elias Canetti. Now, Canetti is mostly known for his nonfiction, and in particular for his diaries. He wrote one novel. It's a high modernist text, and it is fantastic. The main character in this book is an antisocial sinologist who will do things like go on walks looking into all of the bookstore windows just to make sure that his collection of books remains the only important collection in the city. And when he interviews a woman to be his maid, this woman, who happens to be illiterate and has a very high respect for books as objects, she's enthralled and very in awe of his library and collection. And Kian, our protagonist, he thinks that this woman is the only sensible woman he's ever met who has such respect for books. And he ends up marrying her, and this quickly falls apart, and she chases him out of his home, and he has sort of a Dante's Inferno kind of fall into the underground. But his Virgil is a criminal dwarf that ultimately wants to rip him off. But the book is very well written. He sort of loses his mind, even has a poetic break of some sort. And being this staunch hater of fiction, he only cares about sinology and the sciences. When he loses everything, you see how limited his worldview was, and how little help it is to him now. And we get wonderful characters like his brother, who is a psychiatrist who started out as a gynecologist, who has some chapters with the most beautiful psychoanalysis. And in general, the quality of the writing is so sustained and so high. and I wish I could just be astonished and surf that wave once more. But I'll probably reread it soon, and I've also bought the recent Canetti reader, so excited for that. But yeah, if you haven't read Auto da Fe, I very strongly recommend it. My third choice is an oddball. Today I Wrote Nothing by Daniel Carms. This is a collection of his writing. It includes prose pieces, lots of short kind of microfictions, plays, and some more traditional poems. Very deadpan, absurd style to it. For the most part, he's funny and unnerving, and sometimes quite incomprehensible. But that's sort of why I would want to have that first reading experience of this again. I think that it's been a few years, and I have developed as a reader, and I would still probably have an experience of being astonished and entertained and wanting to share snippets of it with my friends at all times. But I think maybe I would be even more ready to appreciate it now. So I don't think I feel ready for that reread for a couple more years yet. But it's very good. It's very strange. It's very singular. There's not a lot of other books that I feel compares easily to this. It is also fairly well received. On Goodreads, it has 2,149 ratings with an average of 4.31, which I think speaks to the quality of this really quite strange collection. A lot of people seem to love it and really taken to it. So if it at all sounds appealing, then it might be for you. But this is also probably the one I would be least likely to recommend to just about anyone without knowing them first. Next up, my fourth pick is Darconville's Cat by Alexander Theroux. Now, I do think that this book will hold up well to rereads, and in many ways the book structurally is very straightforward. What is truly amazing about this book is just the most gorgeous prose, and Theroux has a vocabulary that is very impressive, and even more impressive than knowing lots of obscure words. I feel like whenever you read his sentences, you understand a lot of these words out of their context, and when you look up precise definitions, you're always struck by that he had chosen these words very well. They describe the thing better than the more common word would. Apparently the book was written as some sort of revenge on an ex, so you won't get much enlightenment and sort of view of women in this book, but especially the first chapters are very smartly written. He is very intelligent, very well-rounded when discussing literature and such, and every chapter is stylistically very different, and some great parodies of great writing from the ages before. I think that it's very much a shame that it's so hard to get a hold of this book, and hopefully we'll see a reprint soon, as I think that as the quality of writing, this is few books that can match it, with obvious exceptions like James Joyce. My fifth choice is The Lime Twig by John Hawkes. This is another piece of extraordinary writing, very different than Theroux. It's a much more dense and opaque, hard to cut through writing, where it's not about vocabulary, but sort of construction of sentences and imagery, but truly, truly spectacular. The writing is dreamlike, and the mood is dark and sinister, and there are descriptions of violence in this that are hard to stomach. And Hawks is also interested in sexuality and violence, and it's not for everyone, but I think that it's a masterclass in writing, and he's an experimental writer. The book was released in 1961, and John Hawkes really was a leading figure in American literature of that time. The sixth pick is Ulysses by James Joyce. Now, I was a little on the fence about this one because I had a sort of a jumbled first read of this book. I was too focused on the puzzle that is Ulysses. I was jumping back and forth with resources like Hugh Kenner and Stuart Gilbert's book. I paused the book to read the Odyssey, and earlier this year I took a reread from start to finish where I sort of referred to secondary material afterwards at the same time as I read Elman's excellent biography, and I read The Most Dangerous Book, and Here Comes Everybody, the amazing guide by Anthony Burgess. Now, I would very much like to have a fresh first read of Ulysses again. If I had the knowledge I have now about what I think is the proper approach to Ulysses. I think a first read of Ulysses should be as blind as possible. I think having read the Odyssey is a good idea, and having familiarity with Shakespeare and Hamlet in particular is fine. But I think that's where it stops. I think you go in for the first time and you don't try to solve the puzzle. You don't try to get the book like everyone else is talking about that they're doing. You read it and you just enjoy the amazing craft of the book, just the beautiful prose of the book. You marvel at how different the chapters are, and you can wonder about what the deal is with everything. And you just try to enjoy it as a book because it is beautiful as a book. And then you read it again and again and again, and then with more material. So yeah, that would be good to read Joyce fresh, armed with a little knowledge of how to attack it. My seventh pick is The Obscene Bird of Night by Jose Donoso. This is also a very experimental book. It's very subversive. It is disgusting in some ways. It has problematic sexuality with minors. It has some descriptions that are hard to stomach, but it is also one of the most impressive structural tricks I've ever experienced. And I've been spellbound and dazzled by the narration of this novel. I think it's one of the most impressive narrative structures I've ever read. The main story of the book is the last crumbling remains of an aristocratic family who has the last heir is quote-unquote hideously deformed, and his father tries to build him a sanctuary where he only hires people with physical flaws to match his sons. So in a way, he builds a world where the father, the only of normal appearance person, becomes the monster and the outsider. The book then plays around with some nonlinear chronology, We get some Chilean mythology. Everything gets quite strange and weird, but having another chance to unravel this structure and be astonished and amazed again is something I would very much want for The Obscene Bird of Night. Number 8 is The Recognitions by William Gaddis. This is a book I love very much, and it's a book that I didn't know anything about when I read it. A friend of mine told me that this was something I had to read, and so I did. I brought it to an emergency doctor's appointment where I had to wait for 4.5 hours to get my prescription filled, and I got a very big dent into this book, and I just fell in love. I just thought that it was so well written and so funny, and that was mostly it. I really wasn't used to reading these books. I read it before I read books by Pynchon and John Barth and Gass, and it's probably around the same time as the same friend recommended I read David Foster Wallace. And my love for Gaddis has outlasted my love for David Foster Wallace. I think that this would be a very interesting book to have a first reading experience with my current understanding and having read what I've read now. I think that it's been so long since I read it that it won't be a terribly tainted reread either. But it really astounded me the first time. It really impressed me. And having that much fun reading is something I would always try to do again. The last book on the list is Impossible Object by Nicholas Mosley. Anyone who knows me online from Discord know that this is a book that I often recommend to people. I've read this book 3 times, and I've lent this copy to a friend and my wife, and it was looking pretty bad after the second read of it, but I was noticing that after being on the shelf, it's not looking so bad now. I think this book is structurally approaching perfection as well. I think that it has beautiful prose. You'll find so many memorable sentences to pick out and share with readers. I think it's perhaps a bit dated in how it discusses relationships, and we're not getting recipes for how to solve this impossible object, which is love. And it's also a reference to the structure of the novel. It's structured sort of like an Escher staircase, and it is a true joy to unravel. And I think about it and come up with new theories every time I read it, but experiencing that flash of recognitions when it's starting to become clear is something I would love to do again for the first time. So if you haven't read it, then lucky you. Now, to close out and to discuss a little bit about what makes it different, a list of books you'd want to read for the first time as opposed to just books you love, I'm going to talk about 2 books I do not want to read for the first time again. If on a Winter's Night a Traveler is one of my favorite books, and I love it very much for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that I read it at the exactly right time. This was a book that showed me a lot of the possibilities of the medium, like what a book can be. It was one of those books that I felt like I was sat down with the author and he was sort of smiling, reading over my shoulder, just waiting for me to discover the fun little games that he had hidden in this gem of a book. And John Barth is the same. I appreciate what many will call gimmicks, in that I sort of feel like a social connection through them. And I feel like I'm very grateful that I read this Calvino book when I did. And I am afraid that if I read it for the first time now, it would not be as special. I think it would probably be a lot of fun and I would still enjoy it and rate it highly, but it wouldn't be an emotional, like, short list of books that I really and truly love. And I think that's a difference worth noting. The second book that falls into the category of a book I love but that I don't want to read again for the first time is Malcolm Lowry's fantastic Under the Volcano. This is one of those books that reread after reread is really helping me unpack and grasp the beauty of the book. This is so dense and packed with allusions and requires a lot from the reader. It has a lot of beautiful writing, some amazing prose, and just the psychology of the drunken haze of the consul is very impressive and very neat to experience. But I think that I don't want to read this for the first time. I want to read this for the fourth time and the fifth time and the sixth time. I have read it 3 times, and in between I've read David Markson's book on Under the Volcano, and I read Day's biography of Laurie, and it's one of those projects where I want to explore more. I don't want the experience of reading this for the first time and feeling like I'm only scratching the surface. And I feel in a similar way with Ulysses as well. Ulysses is a book that I will reread for the rest of my life and will always get something more out of. But Under the Volcano is similar. It's sort of convoluted, rambling, beautiful writing. It takes a while to unpack, and it's stunning and spectacular. But I don't think I will ever be a good enough reader to get this book on the first read. And maybe in 20 years my answer would be different, but for now I want to spend more time with the consul and Yvonne. Well, there we have it. I make a 24-minute video instead of posting one image to Instagram. The list could be extended to 50 books easily, but it is what it is. Thanks for watching, guys. And thanks to Sean for making this tag into a YouTube tag.